Welcome everyone to another performance clinic. Today's topic is monitoring as a self-service with Dynatrace. I'm Andy Grebner, now that I can correctly pronounce my name, and I'm joined by Christoph Renders. Hey Christoph.
Hey, good afternoon.
Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. So I'm Christoph. I'm a global architect of our services team. I'm based out of Belgium, and I've been with the company for about 10 years, where I've been visiting all of our customers all over the world, helping them in their journey on Dynatrace. And in the last year, actually, I started with the practice of Autonomous Cloud together with some colleagues here, bringing basically the message of Dynatrace and how we as a company do things to our customers, because we have some great lessons that we have learned, some great things that we have been implementing, and yeah, we want to share that love with everybody.
That's awesome, and you did 10 years. That's amazing. I think we met each other when you were doing the early stages, right?
Early stages,
down under. You were actually in Australia.
Yes, living in Sydney. Yes,
that was cool. All right. So, folks, again, as a reminder, put in your questions into the question feature in case questions come up. Now, let's kick it off. I want to do a quick intro, right? And let's actually see if our technical setup works as expected. You talked about Autonomous Cloud, right? I am a self-proclaimed ACE and DevOps activist. So, folks, if you heard me talk about it, write about it, we've been talking about Autonomous Cloud for a while, and there are 4 building blocks. Right? The first one is automate monitoring, or as I like to call it, monitoring as a self-service, which is also the focus point of today's performance clinic. What does this really mean, and how do we implement it? But to go on and build on top of this, and Christoph, this is also what you are helping our customers with, is the additional building blocks on top. So this is automate quality, one of my favorite topics, right? Or as I call it, performance as a self-service. It is integrating Dynatrace in your performance testing tools, in your automated testing, whatever you use, however you kick it off, but really automatically getting value out of Dynatrace. You don't have to be a performance expert to understand what's the difference between one build and the other. The next building block is automate delivery. This is all about integrating Dynatrace in your continuous delivery process, enforcing quality gates, figuring out how blue-green deployments, how canary deployments are doing. Last step, and I think that's obviously the most, let's say, mature one, the most hardest to reach, even though the most, I think, exciting for everyone is automate operations. This is about self-healing. It's about what we call no-ops internally, right? Bringing the system back to a healthy state. So these are the 4 building blocks, and I'm sure you will cover a little bit more later on, also on the offering that we have around it when it comes from a service implementation. Now, the next thing I want to quickly highlight, because this is kind of important for me as an end consumer, what do I expect when I hear monitoring as a self-service? What I expect, Christoph, you to teach me in the next, I would say, 30 to 40 minutes is how I can roll out the Dynatrace One agent in a smart way so that everyone, whoever I am, gets the right data at the right time. I always say Dynatrace is great, Davis is even better, but if we teach Davis, we make Davis even more valuable because I can get the data that I need or the answers that I need at the right time to make the right next decision. Right? So what I'm expecting to hear from you is how can we correctly use tagging and naming so that Dynatrace knows exactly what are these components, what is a host that is relevant for me, what's a service, what's an application that is relevant for me. I also want to know, and we'll have Davis to analyze the data for me, so I don't have always to look at the data for diagnostic purposes or optimization purposes. I want to be notified in an operations use case in case there is a problem, and then I want to have the right people notified. If I'm a developer and something is wrong in the infrastructure, I want the ops team to be informed. If something is wrong on the business, I want the business to be informed. And then whoever I then inform and whoever needs to act on it, they need to have the right data to then make the right next decision. Right, so this is what I mean with monitoring as a self-service. Give me the data or the answers at the right time so I can make the right decisions without always having to go to an expert. Now, there is a little expert or a little, let's say, visualization, and we have our friend with us here, the UFO. Right, there we go. We brought one. I can hover over.
There you go.
There we go. Normally, Christoph, it should not show red.
Well, yeah, it's looking at my pipeline, and I kicked off a build job right before starting this webinar, and it looks like one of my pipelines failed.
So you broke the bell. So let's hope we'll fix it. Maybe self-healing kicks in.
Maybe.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah. So, but obviously that the UFO has been a big part of our story, and it's also part of when we enable people with monitoring as a self-service. It's another way of visualizing data. What's currently wrong is a data radiator. Right? All right. Last thing I want to highlight. is, and I think this actually came from you because I like this, what you said, we can teach Davis so Davis becomes even better, a better supporter, a better assistant, a better colleague of ours.
Yeah.
I will later talk a little bit also about Captain and how Captain implements monitoring as a self-service, but so that people understand what they can get if they do this right. Self-service for me is one of the use cases is I can open up either my chat application, my Davis Assistant chatbot, either in our own interface or through Slack or MS Teams or whatever we have, and I can say, hey, what's the response time of my particular service? I don't have to go to Christoph, to my expert, to show me the dashboard. I can just ask. So I get the information, and then I can also click on that link, and that immediately gets me to the right dashboard that shows me all the relevant data for my service. This is what I mean with self-service, right?
Yeah.
And that's, now I want to hear from you what this actually entails for customers to implement this.
Yes, very good. Thanks, Andy. So if you take a look at this, right, what does it take for one to do MAS, monitoring as a service, as a self-service? And we have a couple of key components, and you already touched on it, Andy. It was very great. So first of all, we need to make sure that our one agent is there, right? And of course, deploying the one agent can be done in various ways, right? And there's various ways to automate that. But then the next step is, how do we do this intelligently? And so monitoring really becomes part of our fabric, right? Becomes part of our day-to-day work, but doing so, making it easy for us to get to the right information, right? We are talking about large estates, people with a lot of agents, with a lot of data. How do I make sure that a developer can get to his information very fast, very efficiently? Yeah. And we do this by adding right meta information, so we can use that information and for naming and tagging, for example, or just adding extra context. You know, a link to a Bitbucket repository, for example, for that particular artifact that is running. The beauty of that is that this information then becomes available everywhere, and people just can go from Dynatrace, maybe Dynatrace detected a problem on an entity, to actually to the right source, to the right list of Jira tickets that have been resolved in that particular artifact, right? And getting all that information in one easy to reach place. Right?
Perfect.
Having that meta information for tagging and naming, using then those tags and those names again for management zones and for dashboards, right? And then what you said, making Davis even smarter than it already is. How can we feed extra information into Davis so it actually uses that for its correlation, right? You deployed a new version, you changed a feature flag, you did a configuration change. Telling Davis about it will only make it better in case things do go wrong because of that change. Perfect. And then last but not least, how do we get the information, the Dynatrace problems that Dynatrace detects, how do we get them into the right notification system that we are using? Right? Not everybody uses ServiceNow or Jira or any other platform. Every team uses their own. How do we make sure that we can actually help those people out in the right way?
Perfect. That's a nice overview, by the way. I like it. It's nice step by step, and also shows all the features, the different configuration options we have in Dynatrace.
Good. All right. So let's start from the beginning, right? And then I do want to take a little bit of time of kind of phrasing our one agent in a way, because over the last 10 years, right, I've been seeing all these accounts that where we go in and we bring light into the darkness. We have a great friend for us to do that, right? We have the one agent, and this one agent has this capability of really gathering a lot of information, a lot of dimensions, right? It's not just transactions that we're tracing. We're getting actual topology information from our applications. Who talks to what? Who is dependent on what? Who uses what? If this thing breaks, where is the impact going to be? Right? We get events from external systems. We calculate metrics. We get metrics in. We actually, like I said, trace, and we actually monitor the behavior of our end users, all with a single one agent. Right? We built all this information that comes in, and we built that into what we call the Smartscape, right, which is our data source, our single source of truth. All of this information is in there. It's dynamic. It updates automatically whenever new entities are added, whenever new services get discovered, whenever new processes are being monitored. They all just get added in there, and it's the basis of our AI, and it's the reason why we are so good at what we do, right? We put an engine on top of that to make sense of that information. Yeah, we call that one Davis, and that actually will give us all this information. Now, I think for most people here on the call, this is not news, hopefully, right? They are using Dynatrace, they're loving it. They actually are benefiting from this every day. So But the real question becomes, like, once we have all this data, how can we actually use it, right? We can feed data in, right? We have support for open telemetry. We're actually actively participating in this project because we embrace this kind of change in the industry. We actually feed data in from external sources like AWS from CloudWatch. We actually can get events from ServiceNow. We can actually push information to ServiceNow and the solutions like that. We have APIs for integrations with continuous delivery tools like a Jenkins, like whenever you kick off a new build, tell Dynatrace about it. And we can actually ingest metrics even from places where we cannot install an agent. Right? And all that information comes together to give us answers and actions. How can we actually use this information? Now, this is all great. How do we get there? How do we get there, right? And the first thing, like I said, is automated monitoring. There's a lot of ways within Dynatrace, with the OneAgent, how we can automate the deployment of our OneAgents. There we have a Kubernetes operator, right, where we actually can say, hey, we put our intelligence of people like me, people like you, into a piece of software to make sure that our OneAgent is automatically deployed on all the nodes in our Kubernetes cluster, right? So we don't have to take care of that because that's a very boring job. Operators can do that much better than we can, right? There's a lot of other ways to do this through a push release. For Cloud Foundry, we have integrations with cloud providers where we just automatically can deploy our OneAgent, or we can use Ansible or Chef or Puppet to do the same thing, right? And our team is also very working on that.
Yeah. Right. I think there's also some great stories from customers out there how they do this in large scale.
Yes.
Right? I always remember Reinhardt,
yes,
right, who works at SAP, and he's been rolling out thousands of OneAgents in their cloud. And I think I remember one of his tweets where he was like doing a barbecue on Friday night, and with his phone he was like clicking the button that was then rolling out Dynatrace OneAgents. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, beer in one hand.
Beer in one hand.
Yeah, OneAgent in the other kind of thing, right? Yeah. All right, so many ways of doing that, but I think the key here is that deploying the OneAgent should not be something you do after the fact. It should just be there. You have a new app that's being onboarded, you're working on, it's monitored, right? And once it's monitored, we have to make sure it's done properly. And that's where actually the next part comes in. So how can we use information that comes from various parts, and how can we use that inside Dynatrace? And if you look at our Smartscape, which I will be building out, I think, like no real surprise there, building out the Smartscape here. Now we can see various bits of information. We can actually start using information from different parts through automation, and we can use it for our naming and for our tagging, right? So building up from the host into the process level, right? We have services that we build on top of that, basically the traces that we are gathering through our agents, and then we have applications, our touch points with our users, with your users, how they actually interact with the application through our real user monitoring. Now, what we can do here, and you can see it on the left, right? We can actually add custom information through environment variables, right? That actually is then automatically put in Dynatrace in the form of tags, right? In the form of custom metadata, even to overwrite the name of the name of our detected process. We can actually influence the behavior of our OneAgent through that. So you can see here, I'm actually adding tags as a developer or as somebody who is responsible for writing an application, not necessarily knowing much about how to configure Dynatrace. He or she can already influence the behavior of our OneAgent in that point. And that actually becomes very important because then it also becomes part of your code base, right? It's just you apply your YAML files, for example, and in those YAML files you already specify how I want to tag something. You don't have to go into the monitoring. So that it's already there.
Becomes monitoring as code, monitoring as configuration.
Yes,
so it is.
Exactly.
By the way, let me just quickly turn off our cameras because then we get a little more real estate for the stuff that is really important here. And because then I think this is really important so people can see. Quick question here, and also a reminder, folks, if you have questions, put them into the question feature of GoToWebinar. So I can see on the host level you have host groups. So that's both an environment variable that you can either specify as part of the installation of the OneAgent. So grouping your hosts, let's say an example would be data center A, data center B, or business unit. Right?
Or even just saying something like, I'm running my app on OpenShift and on Cloud Foundry, but I want to separate those infrastructure components out. You can actually do something like that. Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
There's also, so it's either through an environment variable, it's through an installation property, there's also a config file. So there's different ways how we can actually pass this information to the OneAgent installer. a level up, you see the DT tags, the custom props, the DT node-ID, again, environment variables, which means also works beautifully if you think about a containerized environment, because you can just pass these as part of your deployment YAML file. And you'll see some examples of this later, right? All of this data is then automatically picked up by Dynatrace. It's beauty.
Exactly. And what we will do is actually, once we have, just need to make sure, once we actually have this information available as an environment variable, it'll show up immediately inside Dynatrace. You can see here on the right, we see here that we have our environment variable automatically just picked up. This is just the tags. And then with the meta information, it shows up as well automatically. And the beauty of that is that, like I said, it's done as code. It can be version controlled as well, and people can influence it without even having to touch the monitoring tool.
And Chad is actually just chatting with me. He's just making a comment that the host custom property will also add this metadata on the host level, and you can also propagate it up, trickle down effect. So that's really cool.
So I'll actually have an overview in the next slide or two where I will actually see where can we actually add this information in, because there's many different sources that we can use for that. Right, and once we have that information in, now we're having this information available on the process group. We can create rules that actually take that information, the metadata or tags, and actually build a tag based on that. Right, and this can all be done then automatically. And once we have that, we can then use that to build management zones. We can do a lot of crazy cool stuff with that. Sure, my laptop's not moving anymore. And here you can see I almost forgot to mention that. You can see that we have the host group here, and also that will actually show up on the hosts section. Now, host groups have a lot of benefits in splitting up process groups and things like that. You can set up custom anomaly detection rules as well, right, based on those host groups. So you can actually, on an entire host, say how it will impact your monitoring just by dividing. As I said, right, where does this information come from? And as I told Andy as well, this is also in the slide, so I'm not going to cover it in too much depth, right? You don't need to take screenshots or pictures. You will have this information available, but this information can come from various places. And you can see that there's either on the one agent level, on the host level, we can actually specify everything in a file, right? There's always a file that exists. You can put this in. Again, you can automate that. You can make this part of your pipeline, right? So no manual effort involved. We always preach automation, right? This is where that all comes from, right? On the process level, this information can be added through environment variables, right? Again, this can be automated, right? All container platforms have a way of passing environment variables, and you can do this in manifest files, right? And then once you have all this information there, you can then use it to create your management zones and your rules.
There's a question from Eric. I want to cover it in the end, but it's going to be about he would like to obviously roll out, deploy the agent to every single environment fully automatically, but then he's wondering about controlling like the visibility or the licensing based on management zones, based on things like this. Eric, I will bring this up later on again because I think we want to focus on how to do things, and then we can cover things like licensing and pricing at the end, and point you also to the right people.
Cool. So once we have this information in there and we have different ways of doing that, we can then start using that, right? We can actually use this metadata for naming and from tagging, right? So you can actually use information that you can specify in your deployment file, in your manifest files, to name your entities, right? So you can make it dynamic. Not everybody wants it to be some app.jar and then some other text that is dynamically generated by Dynatrace, right? We just give you a suggestion how we can name it. But everybody has their own standards and their own best practices, so you can just make it whatever you want it to be, almost, right? But the important part is that you don't do anything manually. You use the information that is there to just name things. So, of course, you need to think about this upfront. You need to have some sort of strategy, right, to do that, and this can then be tailored towards your requirements. And the key part here is that information flows up the Smartscape. So something that's available on the host level, you can use it to name your processes, for example, right? And so that means that automation can be taken a step further. So once we have this information in place, we can actually start, like I said, creating management zones. And management zones, just as a recap, because maybe not everybody knows what a management zone is. Management zone is like a fluid layer on top of the Smartscape, right? You can actually say, hey, I am an operations person, and my interest is actually only the infrastructure layer, for example, right? So then you can create a management zone that says, I only care about hosts and processes. Or I am part of a vertical team that says, okay, my application X is my interest. Everything else I want to filter out. And this gives you focus, right? This gives you get rid of all the noise that you don't care about. Right? So in this case, for example, we have an internet banking one that uses tags, that uses the name to actually put the right components into that management zone. Right? And here as well, we have one for Key Navigator, another one that we actually use. And if you use tags and use your tagging rules properly, if something gets added, if a new service gets onboarded, gets part of that application, it automatically gets added to that management zone, right? So you do the work once, and then the rest will take care of it, so by itself. And once you do that properly, you can actually start using this information. You can actually request this information in a structured way from managers using, for example, our Davis chat systems. Give me the response time of this service. Right? It becomes easy. The data becomes easily reachable.
Yeah, because Davis speaks the same language as well, right? Because if you tell Davis that this is my service, so give me the information about my service that I know what name it should have, then it becomes also easy to consume that data in a self-service way because I know how to phrase the right questions in the right way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very cool. Actually, I just want to quickly cover this one here. This is actually an example from our friends from Citrix, right? They have integrated Dynatrace into their existing chatbots, and they have leveraged the API of Dynatrace. So what I really like about them, same as what you explained earlier, they instruct their developers, hey, if you deploy a new piece of software, whether it's a process physically running somewhere, or whether it's in a container that runs somewhere in Kubernetes, just put in the metadata, the DT tags, the DT custom props, like to which application does it belong to, and who is the, let's say, the owner of this piece of software. Now, what they can do with it, they can then, like in this case, SOA can ask their chatbot, Altron, hey, show me the services that are part of my Citrix application. And so what they basically do, they use the APIs to query Dynatrace and say, give me all the services that you found where I am the owner based on the metadata. And then Altron is responding also already, I think, a sorted list where if Altron knows that Sohaib is talking to Altron, then he, I think, is ordering it and sorting it by where Sohaib is really the owner. So it's really, really cool. And then just another thing, what I like, Altron showed the performance, so similar to what you showed earlier with what we showed with Davis Assistant with the chat option, where we say, give me the response time. Here they said, show me performance. So they are querying actually key performance indicators or SLOs and then putting it out. So this is all possible, and this is really self-service. I don't need to go to an expert anymore because I can just ask my virtual assistant.
Yeah, and I think the key here as well is that the way that it's possible, because if you have a proper strategy and you have consistency in your tags and your names, then this becomes a piece of cake afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
Now, where does this data come from? Well, how can you add metadata? And the data can come from many places, right? And I've worked with customers who really, for one artifact, have 3-4 sources for extra metadata, right? And it comes from things like Jira, like your continuous delivery pipeline, your CI pipelines that you have in place, maybe your platform, like Kubernetes labels or Kubernetes tags that you have in place, or our Captain framework as well. That can also add, and does actually add in extra meta information when you start onboarding services. The goal here is to enrich the monitoring with extra information that can give you some context, right? So, for example, here we added an extra environment variable that gives us the service type, for example, or we added an extra tag that can be put automatically on the entities, right? We also have support for Kubernetes labels, right? So this is something you have to turn on, but this is extremely powerful, right? Because a lot of enterprises that I've been working with, they already have this in place. They already have these labels in place. And they're like, oh, we don't have to actually reinvent the wheel. We just need to enable that. So we're not aware of that. So it's just a couple of commands you need to execute, and I put the link here at the bottom, right? So you can just start taking that and work with that. And then again, once you do that, this information becomes available, and you can start using that to name and tag your entities.
And use it obviously as management zones as well, right? I think this is also the important thing. If you're cloud architects, if your platform architects have already figured out a way how to properly take these resources in your cloud environment, in your platform, then you can repurpose the same information to also provide the monitoring view on top of the same metadata. I think is the critical information here.
Yeah. One of my customers came up with a great idea, built then again around the operator, right? The concept is like how can we just have an operator create the management zones based on our Kubernetes namespaces? And they're actually working on that, building something like that, because they say, well, we don't want to do this every time we onboard a new service, right? This should just be done automatically. Now, what could be meaningful metadata? And of course, this is not an exhaustive list, right? You can add in whatever you want, right? But things like ownership information. Who owns this service? Right? Let's say that you have a massive environment and there's a problem, and there's a particular service that is actually causing or is having an issue, but that issue is actually caused by a dependent service that it's relying on, right? If I know that as the owner of that depending service, then I can actually easily see, hey, who do I contact to resolve my issue? Things like project information. If you have complex architecture, where do I find easily information about this service, the architecture, the components, things like that? Escalation points if things don't go well. What are the features that are enabled? What are the stories, linked to stories that have been resolved in this particular build and so forth? But like I always think that showing a real-world example is best. So this is from one of my accounts that I've been working with, like basically saying, hey, they added a link to Bitbucket for that particular version, right? So it immediately points it to the right source control location. And then one thing I want to add is, I think in 186, the version 186 of our platform, we will actually have this as a link clickable. Right now we have to copy the text, and we went to our engineers and they're like, hey, can't you just make this a link? And they're like, yes, we can, because they like us, right? So they will actually, you could just click on it and it will go straight there. Again, here, the link to Jira Insights, where they actually give you an overview of the component, who is the owner, some technical information, the architecture, and things like that. And a list of Jira tickets resolved in this version, because they are continuously, that's the world we live in, right? We are continuously deploying new versions every day, perhaps, right? But what was actually resolved? What are linked to the release notes, for example? A quick note on some best practices, right? So everything you want to use for filtering, I would add it as a tag, right? But everything that is just informational, I would add it as meta information, because otherwise, if you over tag, right, then things become messy. Right? So you have to. I like to keep things a little bit clean, right? So keep that in mind when you do that. One little caveat: if you tag on a higher level entity like a service and you propagate it down, right, you have to keep in mind that if that service doesn't receive any traffic, the propagation also stops working after a time of inactivity. So if you're depending on that, that might actually cause some surprises. So I'd rather tag on the process group level if I can, and then propagate up and down to the service and the host. That's something that I prefer. And leverage existing platform tags and labels as much as you can. Things like coming from through AWS through CloudWatch, things that we get from Google, Kubernetes labels and so forth.
Eric is just asking if Azure tagging is also supported, and yes, it is. So if you run on Azure, we'll pull in the tags. I think, Eric, if you want to find out more information, just open up your search engine, search for Dynatrace tags, Azure, and then you will find also the Azure tags that we have. And then you pull it in, and then you can use it just for the same things as you said, the naming, the tagging, and the management zones. Yeah.
Good question.
All right, perfect. So I want to quickly give you an update on how Keptn is doing things. So what Keptn, for those people that don't know what Keptn is our open source project. It's a control plane for continuous delivery and automated operations. It basically implements how we think a modern autonomous cloud platform should look like, that has all these 4 building blocks built in. The way you actually enable and configure this is through Keptn Configure Monitoring Dynatrace, and then Keptn just does a bunch of REST calls to actually configure all this fully automatically in Dynatrace, which means if we can do it, you can do it as well. Just to give you a little overview, Christoph, you talked about the DT custom prop. So also with Keptn, if you're using Keptn to deploy your microservices, then on Kubernetes in your deployment file, you can specify the Keptn project, stage, service, and the deployment. We have the placeholders for the actual project stage and so on and so forth. And what we have automated naming rules put in that will automatically name the service based on the project, the stage. So I immediately know this is part of the simple project, simple node, prod, production, and canary. You can see how the metadata shows up on the bottom left. So the thing that we put into DT custom crop environment variable is automatically available in Dynatrace on the process group, and then we propagate it also up to the service level, right? So that's what we do, and I think this is a good best practice. Yeah. You know, if you have services and they run and you deploy them into different stages and they belong to a certain project, these are the things you want to put as a metadata, so you can use it for tagging and naming. Yeah. Same is true for deployment. If you do blue, green, canaries, this is what you want to do. Next thing, just an example. I want to quickly glance over this. I know it's very small, but you get the slides later on Dynatrace University. This is just an example of, for instance, the tagging rule that we created. So that takes the metadata we were promoting on the process, so in this case on the container, and then we're propagating it up to the service. A very simple rule that basically says take a certain piece of information from DT custom prop and then propagate it up. Also process group naming, right? We talked about this earlier. I like to have meaningful names for me. So that's why I said, please name the process group based on project, service, stage, and deployment. And Dynatrace is doing this automatically for me. Last but not least, what we also do, you mentioned dashboards earlier. We show the dashboard. Keptn also uses the APIs that are available in Dynatrace to automatically create dashboards for every project. As you can see here, it's one dashboard per project, a couple of tiles per stage. So I see dev, staging, and production. And what we also do, we automatically create management zones based on the metadata. So you can fully automate that. That means there's no excuse anymore not to also do this in your environment. And I think that's the key point here. And then if you do this right, then again, I mean, we've seen this before, but I can say, hey, what's the response time of simplenode.prod.canary? Because I know this is the name that I've been given. I get the name and I can click on also the link, and then it gets me directly to that dashboard. I don't need to query and I kind of navigate to the dashboards or the UI anymore. I just get directly to it. So Keptn teaches Davis to become more useful for self-service. That's really what it is. You teach your colleague, and Davis is your new colleague.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Cool. And if you take this a step further, right, like if you have a problem, right, and you get a ticket created, then people just using a natural language can ask, exactly, how is it right now? Yeah. Right? Is it better? They don't have to go through dashboards if they don't like to.
Yeah, and exactly, and I also want to give a shout out to Jed, who's on the call today, and he gave already some good questions here. But we wrote a blog where he also worked on making names more meaningful for end users. So if there is a problem coming in, if you use names that make sense for people that need to look at this, it just becomes more flawless. So it's really cool stuff. Yeah.
Cool. I want to switch gears a little bit because we talked about how can we make the Dynatrace monitoring data more meaningful to the people who consume it, right? Through naming, tagging, how can we group things together, how we add extra information in. But the other part is how can we add in extra events? How can we tell Dynatrace a little bit more about our environment dynamics, for example, right? So Dynatrace has this concept of events, and Dynatrace detects a lot of events by default, right? So things are having high CPU usage, right? There's a high disk I/O, there's a service that slows down. Not everything gets created as a problem, right? That's a very important part, because if everything were a problem, then everything were red all the time and nobody would look at it. So we actually take all these events in and correlate them together, and if something has an impact on that is high enough, we create a problem out of it and we group multiple events together, right? They've been existing for ages, and now we also have the capability of adding extra events in. Yeah, so you can enrich the AI, our Davis, with more information about what's happening, and Davis will then use this for root cause analysis, and users of Dynatrace will also be aware of dynamics, and that is actually the important part, right? If a new version is deployed, but your monitoring tool doesn't show you that it has happened, right, then people who are not aware of that new deployment might be like, oh, why do we have all of a sudden an increasing failure rate, right? So a big part of that is just making people aware. And those events can actually be created via the Dynatrace API. I put a link in here as well with some examples on how to create events for you guys to use later on as well. Now there's a bunch of event types that we can actually create. Some of them are just informational that actually add information to our entities, right? Like the annotation, the configuration change, the deployment events, and information events, right? But we also have the capability to create problems based on an event that we see. So we can actually tell the NHS, okay, actually I want you to create a problem on this entity, right? And it will then do that for you. So we have those here: availability, error, performance, and resource contention events, right? We can actually do that. Yeah. An event attaches to entities, right? And it has to attach to something, right? So it attaches to entities. And so we have two main ways to do that. We can use this via an entity ID, basically tell service 123, right? Now, this is actually not a really good way to do this for dynamic environments, or because these entities, there might be new ones that get created. You might have new services appearing and not. So we want to make this dynamic, and we can use attach rules for that. Yeah? So when you have new services that are discovered or new processes that are started and things like that, we can actually send them via attach rules. So your entity type and then your tags again. Yeah, tags are coming back. They keep on popping up everywhere you look, but they are very useful for this. Now again, here, where can these events come from, right? You know, you have your usual suspects, right? Your CD or CI solutions, maybe your testing tool that tells the NHS, hey, we launched a new load test, so people are not surprised when they see a massive amount of traffic on a particular service. We have Captain that can tell us when it's doing a new deployment as well, or when it does an evaluation, talking about quality gates, something for another performance clinic or on another day. But what was the evaluation like? What did it actually get? Did it pass the quality gate that we set up, right? Or linking it with a future management solution that actually says, hey, we turned on this promotion, or we turned on the new UI, right? Which is, you know, a lot of companies do it this way, right? You have your old UI and your new UI, they're both available, and you can just flick it, right? Maybe this new UI causes issues, right? You can actually resolve it much faster. So we can send this information in through an event. So a couple of examples, right? You can see here there's a lot of information on the screen, right? So I don't want to overwhelm people here, but you can see here on the left we have our configuration change events. We have a promotion that we have applied, right? We attach it to a particular entity. We actually say, hey, our promotion rate was set to 30%, right? Meaning that, we will have a particular configuration that is now in effect, even giving us a hint on how to remediate this, right? Because any change that you make is a potential break, or it can cause issues. How do I quickly resolve this? And it's not about self-healing necessarily, right? Because I think a lot of people confuse the two. In this case here, it is about, I have a problem. How do I resolve it? You know, you don't want people scrambling. I can give you a link and give you a suggestion. This is how you actually can resolve it. It's about when you make a change, you know, it's like, I like to compare it very often with when you jump out of an airplane, you better know how to use a parachute, right? And it's the same kind of idea. When you make a change, you have to be ready to roll back. And that's what this is all about.
And the best thing is if it's people that actually, you know, make it an initial change and they already give information about what would they do in case there's a problem.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. It's all about shortening the time to resolve an issue. And then on the right, you see a couple of like deployment events. We're deploying a new version of a service, right? We link to the pipeline. We link to the last Git commit. We actually can give again information about what was actually being done. I've got because that was just a lab example, but I also have an example from a real world customer, right? So for what they have added, for example, they have an event and a couple of fields here. It's like, how long did it take, right, to do this deployment, right? So you can use that to detect regressions in deployment time early on. Why does it take 5 times as long this time than the previous one? Maybe that's already an early indicator that maybe too many libraries are being loaded or something like that, right? Who requested the deployment, right? Not to do finger pointing, but it's important to who do I contact in case something went wrong, or links here again to Jira Insights for that particular component, maybe for that particular release. Links to Urban Code and links to XL release for more information about what actually was being done in this deployment. And this particular customer is very adamant that due to their complexity, they need to have this information there. Otherwise, they cannot really distinguish multiple deployments from each other.
Very cool.
Yeah, another couple of examples. I'm not going to go through all these. I think everybody's perfectly fine reading through this list, but I want to highlight a couple again future management solutions, right? You could just have a hook that every time you change something, this is all automatic, right?
Yeah.
You send an event to Dynatrace and it becomes available, right? Starting and stopping of a load test, quality gating, even if you have an external synthetic tool that you are using, you're not using Dynatrace synthetics, and that synthetic tool detects an outage, right? The quicker that Dynatrace is also aware of that, the better. So you can send actually an outage event, right, to Dynatrace, and again, helping our Davis AI.
There's one question that just came in and it fits a little bit to these examples. Now, earlier in the overview of event types, there was one that was called marked for termination. And the question was, what does this mean? If you look it up, again, use your search engine, Dynatrace, doc, marked for termination, you can actually tell Dynatrace about entities that you're going to terminate on purpose, so that Dynatrace is also aware of not to raise an alert because this was, an intentional thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's also very interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome examples. And there's more questions that are coming in. Patrick, you've asked about event propagation. To whom do we send events when we find problems? I think there's a section coming up at the end about notifications and how that works. So you'll get this in a second.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Again,
cool.
Back to you.
Yeah, so Kapton, Kapton is also obviously leveraging events. And I want to quickly give you an overview of if you use Kapton, let's see if the clicker, here we go. If you have Kapton installed and you tell Kapton about a new artifact, now there's a couple of things that Kapton is actually doing, right? It's following the GitOps approach. It's first updating your Git with the new version information. It's then doing a deployment. It's running a test. And in the end, it's evaluating your quality gates. Now, the most important thing is Kapton is tightly integrated here with Dynatrace. So for everything that changes the actual infrastructure, if it changes the service deployments, if it starts a test, just as you said earlier, we are sending all these events. Like here, deploying my simple node service in version 3 with a direct deployment strategy. This is the information. And what's also nice, every time we deploy, the deployment events are a little special, I would say. They also show up in the charts. When you look on the service screen and the details, you actually see when a deployment happened, and you can immediately see how this changes behavior potentially. And coming back to, right, if the more events you send to Dynatrace, the smarter the Davis AI becomes. So in case there is a problem, then Davis in the root cause section automatically correlates all the different configuration change and deployment change events. So there is an impact. And by the way, we knew somebody did a deployment, then maybe a load test was started or a promotion was enabled, right? These are all the things that are automatically correlated. And not only do I see it in the Dynatrace UI on the problem screen, I can also query this information through the ChatOps approach, right? I can say, hey, Davis, when was my last deployment? Davis then tells me when was the last deployment with the information about who did the deployment, what service was deployed. Again, click on it, and I immediately get to that service that I deployed. Probably it was me, right, or whoever it was. And obviously on that same screen, I see all of these events, everything that happened. It's a full trace history, and I think this is extremely useful.
Yep.
Right.
Very good.
All right. Now, and I think this also goes to Patrick's question that he just raised. Who gets these alerts?
Yeah.
In case there are alerts.
Exactly. Yeah. So Dynatrace, again, it detects a lot of things. It detects a lot of events, and again, it comes down to who do I send to what? Similar approaches with management zones, because management zones, the goal is to give people the information that they care about.
Mm-hmm.
You also do the same thing with alerts. I would even say it's more important than with just a view of the data. You only want to get notified about what is that you care about. Maybe you don't want to get alerted about anything that's not running in production, but you want to disable those. You want to disable those alerts, right? So that kind of thing, those kind of things have become important. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you only care about availability or downtime alerts, right? Mm-hmm. You don't really care too much about slowdown, because for me, a slowdown is still available, right? It's still running. It's just a bit slower, right? So you can actually look at it like that. Or maybe you want to use these problems to actually trigger a workflow. In this case, for example, we have an infrastructure only alert that goes through Ansible, where it's everything that's running on that is tagged with platform EC2. I send it to Ansible, and it will trigger maybe some potential automatic remediation where it says, hey, add another instance for it. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. But maybe, and this is actually very important, right? And we have to look further than just technical remediation. Maybe you have a big important application, your bank, you're a travel agency, or something that people really care about, and they want to use your app, and you have an issue. And this issue is affecting certain people. You actually want to, maybe when there is a problem, automatically tell your users about it. Say, hey, sorry guys, we're having an issue with the app on everybody that's in the European region. Right, we are working on this, but in the meantime, keep in mind that booking your trip might take a little bit longer, is not possible at all. Right? And contact these people if you want to have some help, things like that. Right? And again, we use tags, we use management zones together. We use tags together with alerting profiles. An important concept in Dynatrace, because in an alerting profile, you can filter your alert based on tags, right? But you can also filter it based on the impact that it has. What's the severity of my issue? And combining with that, with the ability to say, hey, I only want to send out the alert if the problem is open for longer than, let's say, 20 minutes, right? I don't want to immediately get a notification only when it's been going on for long enough. You can actually combine those things together using an alerting profile to get the right notification to the right person.
Perfect. For this, Patrick is asking another follow-up question. So with the problem detection here, I think you answered it, and I also just typed in the answer, but he's asking about, can Dynatrace then auto-remediate as well? So in this case, we are notifying tools that do auto-remediation. As you can see here, depending on which tools you already have in place, whether it's Ansible, whether you use ServiceNow Workflows, Xmetas as a nice solution as well. Also, we in Captain, right, one of the use cases of Captain is continuous operations, which actually includes auto-remediation. So when a problem from Dynatrace comes in, it looks at the problem, and then depending on that, can execute different actions. So Dynatrace itself, the core platform, no, we don't do auto-remediation, but we give you the root cause and the impact information about that problem, and then the tools that do your deployment or infrastructure management can then react on it.
Yeah, that's a good question. All right. So again, if I think we're actually perfectly right on time. I like it when that happens. So if you want to really summarize what we just talked about, right? So how does one do MAS? How does one do monitoring as a service? We talked about making sure the agent is there properly, automatically, and ready to give you information, but then also making sure that once you have monitoring turned on, it is done properly. Do I make sure that the right information is added, the right tags, the right names are being used? We have management zones that are being created, potentially automatically even. We have dashboards that are available. And the importance there is that monitoring is not an afterthought, right? It is there, embedded in your fabric, it's embedded in the way that you work, right? And once we have all that, we can actually help Davis become even smarter by feeding it events about the dynamics of our environment, about what is changing, what is happening, right? To give it more insights, to help it, not only the people that are using Dynatrace to get insights about what's happening, but also Davis to help it resolve and detect issues even faster. And then once we have those problems, how do we send them, the right problems, to the right people with the right medium?
Yeah, that's true, with their channels. That's perfect. Cool. So I know there's 2 or 3 more reminder slides, and then we'll go through the Q&A section. If you want to do me a favor and just maybe click on the next slide.
Yeah, I do have one more thing that I would like to talk about.
Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. I think the beers are waiting for Andy ready to call it a day, but no, not yet. No, I actually want to highlight. I want to take this little time as well to highlight our practice, right? So I'm part of the ACE team within Dynatrace that actually goes to customers and do this, right? Because a lot of customers, they're loving our tool, but they actually want to take it to the next level. Now, how do they do that? They come to us, right? We work with our customers, and we have a practice around automating monitoring as a service, like a self-service, like you like to call it. And we actually work with our accounts to make what I just talked about a reality. How do we have the right tagging strategy? How do we make sure that monitoring, like I said, not an afterthought, but embedded in our fabric? And the importance here is that it allows you to do so many things. Talking about that chatbot that the friends at Citrix have made, right? Talking about using Davis, the chat assistants, to actually ask it questions, right? Making sure that how do we use quality gates? You need something like this. You need to have the base, right? The foundations is monitoring as a service, right? And so I want to take the time as well, first of all, to thank Andy for the time, to letting me speak about this as well. But also, if you guys have any questions, my contact details are easily found. I think it's also on the webinar. Hit me up, send me a message. I'm very happy to have a discussion with each and every one of you on how we can actually help you out and make this a reality.
And not only should they have your name, they should also have your face. So maybe it's time to turn on the camera again, which brings me to, I just got 2 more reminder slides. And if you could do me a favor, I know I have to go quickly, but reminder slides. There's a lot of material out there. So first of all, for those of you that have not yet experienced Dynatrace, just sign up for the trial. Remember, we are, around the globe at different events, at different meetups. Find us there. There's a lot of training material out there on university, on the YouTube channel. Daniel Carr is doing a great job with his coffee breaks and power demos. So a lot of cool things out there. And a little plug on my end. A colleague of mine, Brian Wilson, and I, we run a podcast called Pure Performance. So it would be great if you could listen in. And which brings me to the real last slide before I open up for question, which is next month, in 2 weeks from now, we're all going to be in Vegas, right?
Time flies.
Time flies.
Yeah.
For those of you that have not yet booked your tickets, be fast, because at least what I heard is that the hot days are almost sold out. So the hot days are the hands-on training days, Mondays and Tuesday. We now have 4 slots instead of 2. We always had 2, but then response was we need to add more. So be quick. And it's going to be at the Cosmopolitan. And Christoph, we're all going to be there.
Yeah, I actually have a hot day on self-healing.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah.
And I also have a breakout session on democratizing data, right, which is very similar to this topic. So if you want to have a chat with me then, it's a great time. There's a good reason to come over. Yeah.
Exactly. And also a great way to chat with other users and what they're doing and how they solve problems.
Exactly. I also want to say, look, guys, my pipeline has fixed itself.
Oh,
self-healing.
Look at that.
Self-healing. Come to life, right? Great.
So it seems that, first of all, Marcel says, hi, Christoph. Nice to see you again.
Hey, Marcel.
Yeah. And I think I answered a couple of questions earlier on. One question from the more early beginnings that I didn't put in. When we talked about tagging and tagging rules, how long does it typically take until these tagging rules actually become effective? Yeah. And because I know there's a difference between the DT tags, right, if you put it through the environment variables versus the tagging rules. So can you elaborate a little bit on that?
That's a very good question. So if you use the environment variable, they get picked up when the process starts up. Right? So that means that if you're using environment variables, you have to recycle your application process. Right? If you're using a tagging rule, it generally takes about 30 seconds. So there's actually a job in the background that runs and that evaluates those rules. So if it doesn't show up immediately after you create it, literally just wait a little bit. But you can always click on the preview button. I always suggest doing that because that is done on the fly. As soon as you click it, it tells you what will be tagged.
That's perfect. Next question, and I'm not sure if we have the answer, but from a tag inheritance perspective, right now there's no option to inherit or kind of trickle down tags from the application layer all the way down to the host or anything underneath, right? No. And I don't think there's also anything planned right now. At least I'm not aware of it.
I'm not aware of something like that.
Yeah, because I think for most applications are touching a huge variety of different infrastructure, especially with the cloud native apps. An individual app can be anywhere. I think that's also one of the reasons. But if you want to get a view of where is your application running, including the app, I think management zones are actually pretty cool for that, right? Because management zones is a combination of different tagging filters. Let's call it that way, right? So you can say that management zone includes everything that is running in this data center and this tag with this particular group, and then also the end user view of this particular application.
You can tag applications automatically by the API.
That's true. You can tag it automatically by the API. That's perfect. Chad also just is giving an add-on to what you said earlier to the previous question about it takes a while it takes about 30 seconds until we tag the automated tagging rules are there. It also takes some time, obviously, for the text to go away. So that
Yes.
means if you change things,
Yeah,
it's the
of
same
course.
thing.
Yeah, same idea. It's a job done. So,
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Then Eric, in the very beginning, you asked about, is it possible if you want to roll out, Dynatrace everywhere, one agent everywhere,
Mhm.
but do you have any control via management zones or any other options to say what type of, that you want to kind of control the visibility, therefore also the licensing? I think that was a question that he was asking. So kind of rolling it out everywhere, but then based on management zones, basically specify which ones, I guess, really become active. I'm not the expert on licensing and pricing, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Right? So Eric, I know it sounds like a classical, this is not kind of my field. I know there's things that this is obviously a topic of discussion. From our point of view, it obviously makes sense that you roll out the one agent, but then also always get the full visibility, right? Because this is the only way so that Dynatrace can really help you catch every problem out there and then give you the level of detail that you need. But if you have any specific questions on licensing and pricing, I would just suggest, reach out to your account rep. So that we cannot answer that question right now. Eric was also asking about the Azure tags. I think we handled this earlier, but he was saying about some Linux app services. He doesn't see the tags there, which might not be fully supported yet. Eric, that could be. The product is pretty huge, and we cover a lot of different technologies, and all the different cloud vendors have different services, and there's different ways for us to get metadata. The best way for me, to be honest with you, if you have a technology that you would like to get better support for, is to go to forums, so dynatrace.com. This is where we have the RFE, the product ideas, and then put in a product idea on this. Yeah. All right. Next question is, when do you plan on webinars for the other, like, say, pillar points of ACE? Yes, we do.
Yes, for
right?
sure. Yeah.
Just as you said, at Perform, we have a full track dedicated to releasing better software faster. It's the whole ACE track, Autonomous Cloud Enablement. And there's a lot of great material, and I'm pretty sure we'll just...
And there's also at Perform, we have the Innovation Towers.
With the Innovation
Towers, yeah. And there is also a section on like a tower dedicated to what we're doing. So you can find myself and my colleagues that will be there, and I think you probably you will be flowing around there as well. So I think it's a great time to have good conversations as well about how we can help you do this.
Perfect. If there are any follow-up questions later on, right, you have our names, Christoph Renders, Andreas Grabner. I'm sure you can figure out a way to contact us. Thanks, Denise, for the recording. Thanks for the questions. And is there a phone app for this year's Perform the Track sessions? Yes, there definitely is. There's always a mobile app where you can download and track sessions. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's ready yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's ready yet either. Typically, it should get available, obviously, once we get very close to the conference. All right.
Awesome.
Christoph?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Awesome. Well done.
It is really time for a beer now, huh?
Wow. Yes.
It's 5 p.m.
Yeah. It is 5 p.m. somewhere.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right.
Thanks
everybody. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.